long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, the special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 12.
By episode 12, I was going to find out at the end that the whole Star Wars saga was actually the dream of Tommy Westfall, the autistic kid from St. Elsewhere, and he was going to hold the book open, and Howie Mandel was going to come out and fist bump it closed.
I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hi.
Yeah,
we found out this week that apparently Michael Jackson wanted to play Jar Jar Binks, and George Lucas said no, but I think Howie Mandel would have been a great choice, too.
Oh, man. Misa gonna pour this right over my head and fill it up.
The Jar Jar Binks that wouldn't let anyone touch him.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you just crazy. I'll tell you something. You come back to Gungan City, and we're going to help you. We're going to give you Jesus juice, and we'll give you a nice blanket, and we'll all take a nap together. Wouldn't that be just great?
Yeah, that's a little, yeah.
So, Qui-Gon, how many Padawans do you say you have under your charge right now?
You know, he's just returning the favor from Captain EO.
And how young are they?
So... Aren't they remaking Captain EO or something, or was that just like a rumor?
Yeah, I don't think they're remaking it.
Or was that like a joke you made that I just in my brain I was like, that would be amazing, and then it became real.
I've never seen Captain EO.
You never saw Captain EO?
No, because the whole time there was a time like 84 to like 97 or something, 98, and I'd never went to Disneyland, so I missed that whole Captain EO thing. By that time, he'd already kind of fallen out of our collective hearts.
I can't remember how old I was. I probably saw it around like 89, 90.
Yeah, the only thing I know about it is, noted... well, I guess Lucas was involved, right?
Yeah.
And noted cannabis smoker Doug Benson was an extra in it.
Right, that's right. Yes.
And he talks about that. Actually, since we're talking about it, I'll just bring it up now. There's that I Was There Too. That's the name of the podcast.
Yeah.
And for us Star Wars people, I actually highly recommend you check out the Greg Proops episode where he talks about his experience at being a voice and a face in episode 1, even though eventually his face was replaced with CGI. He actually did wear like a makeup for it, and he tells some pretty, slightly apocryphal stories about Harrison Ford's, his recreational use of substances.
Right. Did he at all talk about who else was supposed to do that with him? Because in that John Knoll book about the making of all of these like sets and things, he right, because they had to create that character, and he said that originally the plan was for them to hire like 2 well-known improvisers, but he didn't say who they were. He just said like 2 well-known improvisers. Yeah. And so obviously one of them ended up being Bruce, but I always wondered I just assumed it was someone else from like that Whose Line Is It Anyway crowd.
No,
like Ryan Stiles or something.
No, I forget who's the other guy. He doesn't do both voices.
No, but initially the plan was to have like 2 like improvisers that people would sort of recognize, and they ended up not doing that, but they still used Greg Proops. But I always wondered, like, so were they just going to get two people were they going to get like Ryan Stiles and either Proops or who's the other guy?
Wayne Brady.
No. The like kind of balding older white guy.
Oh God, I forget his name. I know
he did like Snackwell's commercials.
Yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about, but I don't remember his name.
Yeah.
I forget. It's definitely a worthless. It's one of those ones where he kind of covers a lot of information quickly. Mm-hmm. And also it kind of takes away a little bit of the magic of it, because I mean Proops is not somebody who was really into Star Wars and stuff, so it was just a gig to him. But he said it was pretty nice. I mean, like the way how they put you up and they drove you, and you had plenty of time to develop the character. And Lucas, I think he directed the sessions because it was a live action. It started out as live action, and then he redubbed. Then they redubbed the performance later on in California, and it was just like a guy, holding a microphone up or something.
Right.
But anyway, it's worth checking out. What do we got going on this week in Star Warsville?
We got a listener question.
Oh yes.
I put out a call for listener questions and comments or whatever over Twitter. We didn't get any of those, but one of our friends had just sort of like a general Star Wars question for us. So,
is this the one from Andrew from the SF Barcast? We got to promote. We got to cross promote.
Right.
Got to work on our brand.
Yeah, that's true. SF Barcast, our friend of the podcast,
and his question:
We're not a network together. We're not in a network together.
Yeah, we're not the Nerdist. Yeah. So you didn't write it down?
Well, I didn't write it down.
Okay, well, I remember.
It's not like that complicated, but I remember what the question is.
Right. So yeah, basically, he said something about where do the Star Wars movies rank in your overall list of favorites movies of all time.
Yeah.
Well, that's really a fair.
Yeah, and with the caveat that like, well, if we don't like obsessively rank what our favorite movies are, then we're worthless. Which I will say that's probably where I am. Like, I have movies that I really like a lot, but I never go like, well, I like number 7 is this one and number 8 is this one. But
so you don't.
I'll do my best.
I kind of feel like I don't know why I think you'd be the dude that would have a list, and you would have a list you'd curate. Maybe not. Maybe not for movies.
I guess if I really wanted to, I could sit down and do it. It never occurred to me.
Well, I'm not like that either. I don't really have like a definitive like list of 10 movies that are, because it constantly changes. Things kind of fall in and out of favor in my mind, and sometimes one day I'll just be watching something and I go, yeah, I never need to see this again. And that's kind of like when I think of favorite movies, I think of movies that's like, it's almost more of an emotional reaction than an art. I mean, if we were thinking artistic merit, it might be a completely different list than, ones that like, I'm always going to I'll always be up to watch such and such a movie, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I believe, we'll just start out at the beginning. So I think you've said Empire is your favorite or A New Hope is your favorite.
Well, I would say that right now, A New Hope actually is kind of in the number one.
Yeah.
It's for a long time. I would say that it was Empire, but it kind of changed. I kind of just like the idea that it's so self-contained, and I think I've said that before. It's just, I mean, and since his question is kind of like, how do we rank the movies, even in the list of movies, other movies that we like?
Right.
I would still say that. Predictably so, probably. I would say that A New Hope is probably my number 1, and Empire would be my number 2 movies of all time. So
yeah, interesting.
Yeah,
I kind of have a conundrum where I haven't really watched them that much in a long time. So I watched all 3 of them recently, like very recently, within the last month or so, with my wife because she had never seen them. But that was like the first time I had watched them in a long time because for a while, it got to the point where, I would put it on and I wouldn't really be watching it like because I knew everything, and I would basically just like be reciting the dialogue along either in my head or out loud. And so, but not really like sitting down to appreciate like the experience of watching it. So it's been a long time, I would say, since I just like sat down because like I want to watch this movie and I want to like enjoy this movie. And so and I also don't really, I'm trying to think of movies that I like better than, I'll be cliche and say that Empire is my favorite because it's probably true, right? It's the one where Lando shows up, and
it's the best constructed film of all of them.
And I'd say it's probably top 10, maybe top 5 of movies that I have seen and enjoyed in my lifetime. Again, like I don't watch it that much anymore, but yeah, I'd say it's probably top 5. If you were asking me my favorite movie ever, like I don't even know if I could name you what my favorite movie ever is. So maybe it is number 1. I don't know. So sorry, Andrew. I'm one of those people.
Yeah, I would say that, as much as it's predictable for the guy with the Star Wars podcast that the first 2 movies are his 1 and 2, I wouldn't put any of the other movies even in the top 10 or even maybe the top 15, No prequels.
I've really grown to appreciate Return of the Jedi more. I will say that. I liked it when it came out, and I liked it enough. Yeah. And then for a while, I was like, "Oh, that's just the Ewok movie, whatever." But I have come to appreciate it a lot. I think, it's full of really cool like designs and vehicles, and the stuff at Jabba's palace is great. Like that's a great kind of set piece, or that's a great way to sort of get everyone together at the start of that movie. The space battle at the end I think is great. There is a lull when they meet the Ewoks and they just kind of sit there for a little while, but I love the speeder bikes, and I love seeing the chicken walkers walking around in the forest, and it's certainly my 3rd favorite Star Wars movie, but I have come to sort of view it a lot more favorably than I did, even like a decade or so ago.
Yeah, that's Jedi's hands down my wife's favorite Star Wars movie. That's the one she always wants if we're in the mood to watch them. She's like, "Oh, just put on Jedi." Of course, she always like about 20 minutes into it, she goes, "Wait, you put in the one with the dance number?" Because it's like,
yeah.
That's the thing. It's like to watch a nice, a good copy of it. You're kind of forced to kind of watch the special editions, and then that, to me, has some of the most, even though it's the least amount of tinkering of any of them, it has the most painful tinkering, in my opinion.
Yeah,
just that kind of idea of the artist with the wet brush at the show, walking up and like, I'm just going to add a couple more things,
Right.
That's the problematic. I'm sure that this isn't on the outline, but I'm sure you've probably, if you've been on the internet this week, you've seen that all of a sudden there's this video series going around that I thought had been around for a while, but I think this is something new where basically somebody catalogs all the subtle changes over the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's, he probably only gets about 60% of them, because there's all kinds of, mixes.
Just like tiny,
like they changed the klaxons in certain films and whatnot, but it does kind of, I know some people had kind of, at least on Facebook, I had seen it kind of raise the ire of a few people that kind of, maybe not huge Star Wars fans, and just kind of enjoy, just kind of how that irritation that people feel that it's 2015. Right. Lucas is essentially not essentially, he's no longer in control of Star Wars, and you still can't get those movies in their unaltered versions.
Right.
Except for those, what do they call them? The Harmy's despecialized editions. That's the...
something like that. I was smart enough to buy the DVDs, the like individual DVDs, before they started putting out all those new box sets. And so those DVDs, they're the special edition. It's the special edition DVDs, but they come with a second disc that has the old Laserdisc version on it.
Right.
So that's typically what I end up watching. I should probably go back and watch the special edition versions at some point.
Do you have a flat screen TV, or is it just the old CRT style?
No, I still have I guess it's pretty flat anyway.
I mean, is it 16 by 9? I guess is really what I'm asking.
I don't know, because it's a slightly older. I've had this TV for years, and it's not that big.
I guess my point is that because of it being an old Laserdisc rip, because I have those too.
Yeah.
That they're not anamorphically enhanced, which means they're not formatted, and so you end up with like having to zoom in, and it really accentuates how old like they're dealing with, Laserdisc rips from the late 80s maybe.
Mm-hmm.
So I've always found that it's like you miss out so much detail by watching them unenhanced. It almost becomes a distraction. At least,
I actually don't have that much problem with it. I mean, maybe this is just sort of me and what I care about with regard to like Star Wars movies specifically, but maybe movies more generally. But like even on this Laserdisc version, like in A New Hope, when the Millennium Falcon is escaping from the Death Star and they're still fighting all these TIE fighters, like you can still see, whatever they did to make the TIE fighter roll the way they photographed it, like the background, the space background just for that thing is it's a slightly different shade. Like it's not as dark or something as what they do. So you can like actually like literally see how they made that happen. And I don't care. Like the fact that I can see that, like it doesn't bother me. In fact, it sort of makes it like, oh, that's kind of cool. I can like see how they did that thing. How they made that effect work. And it doesn't, at this point, it does sort of take me out of it, but having seen it as often as I have, like, I'm already sort of watching it with sort of 1 foot in and 1 foot, or, one eye, taking a broader view and sort of a more meta, like, oh, that's kind of neat. Now that I know how they made this effect, like, that's sort of an interesting story. It's in terms of like taking me out of the film, I don't really watch it. I can't watch it that way anyway. Yeah. So it doesn't bother me that I can clearly see that this is how they made this effect.
Yeah, and that's not my complaint. It's the fact that it's so far back from film quality. Because DVD is like, DVD is pretty nice if you get the right TV, but if it's not anamorphically enhanced, matte lines, hey, I don't have a problem. I actually enjoy that. I like watching like the subtle jump of C-3PO's costume when Luke turns on the lightsaber the first time. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff is great. I would want it warts and all. I really would, because those lines and stuff were there back 40, 38 years ago when you were in the theater. You just didn't experience it. It's like your brain wasn't processing like that. It's like you were just like, it goes by so fast. Yeah, now that we have video and we can freeze frame and we can screen cap, it's like, yeah, it's obvious. And even for this, the special edition, they fixed so much of that in Empire and A New Hope. And then by the time they got to Jedi, they actually kind of seemed to drop the ball in a lot of ways. So a lot of those matte lines to this day exist in the Blu-ray masters of like a lot of the complicated, barrel rolls of the A-Wings and the TIE fighters. Like when they get that big swarm into the Falcon, you can still see tons of them. And sometimes things disappear. And that's one of the big criticisms of the special editions. Initially, it seemed like they were in such a hurry to get that last movie done that it actually suffers in comparison, because they go in and spend, a couple $1 million adding like this, Sice Noodles dance or whatever. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's who's.
Yeah.
And then they don't fix the matte lines.
Right.
So it's like this weird, like, division of labor. It's like, what were you guys really trying to do? When, I think we've established that those special editions they were kind of set. They created the seed money to make the prequels or something like that.
Sure,
that's
and they were they really were more about George Lucas going back and fixing like the big stuff that always bothered him. Like, well, I really wanted, a bigger musical number there with dancing around, but we had to use like rod puppets or whatever. It was more about fixing that stuff than like making the print look as good as it could.
Right.
So yeah. So thank you, Andrew, for that question. If you have a question about anything, even if it's not related to any news about Star Wars, if you just have a question for us, you can find us on Twitter at TalkingBirdcast, or you can email us at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com, and we'll probably get to it.
We do. Also, we had another one, and I don't know how deep you want to go in this. Another one of these what if type questions that I had posed to you about this idea that it kind of harkens back to this the demo, the 3-minute Comic-Con demo, and Mark Hamill's in real sets and practical effects, and that kind of hammering home of that is that
right.
What would have episode 7, 8, 9 been like if in say 1989 Lucas just said to himself, something, I'm gonna go, let's go for it, let's make sequels. Nobody wants to hear the story of how Darth Vader became Darth Vader. I have this great idea for where our characters have been in the last 10 years or whatever, and he just went ahead and did it. I mean, it makes me wonder what the franchise would have been like, because it's like,
yeah, and so making these in like the mid to late 90s, I don't know.
My opinion, and I've been thinking about this, is I think it would actually have been more disastrous than the prequels.
Yeah.
Because it would have removed all concept of like people saying, well, things sure aren't the way they used to be. And they could always look back to always make that argument, like, why don't they just go back to the characters we like? And then he would go back to the characters we like, and he would and that, the 90s were a terrible time for special effects, except for like,
right. We'll say they were a transitional period.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that stuff was they were getting past the first generation, or even the second generation of computers, and moving to like, okay, now everyone, we just have like a room full of people on desktops making these things.
I wonder if he would have gone to, there was all this, his thing like, oh, I had to wait for the technology to catch up to my ideas kind of idea, trope
right.
that he would say. And I wonder if he decided that he needed to do this. And I mean, it's hard to even fathom, because the more I read the books about Lucas, is the more it imparts to me the idea that really the prequels were a financial consideration to him more than anything. It was like his money was depleted. Lucasfilm was not sustaining itself, because it's kind of like the idea. It's like, yeah, they can do the special effects for these movies, but that's a different division. Really, Lucasfilm is about the business of making Star Wars movies. And when they're not making a Star Wars movie, they're not making money. And that's kind of hence why, he sold to Disney and stuff like that. But, would he have had to have conceded like, well, I can't, digital's not up to snuff in 1990, 1991. I mean, really things didn't get hot until those early tests for Jurassic Park.
Right.
Those still hold up, but Spielberg had to use a lot of practical effects with those movies. Mm-hmm. A lot of sleight of hand, a lot of stuff that Lucas didn't have to use in his prequels. But maybe in some ways it's why at least the first Jurassic Park still holds up pretty well effects wise.
And I mean, this is. So I'll say this before I get around to answering your hypothetical question, but I mean, this is always something that it kind of puzzles me, is, with CGI, or at least for George Lucas, right? He got to make the prequels like the way he wanted. He didn't have to listen to anyone else. Like, he could just say like, oh, I want Yoda to do this thing. And then like Yoda could do that thing. Or, with the special edition, right? Like, I want to have this huge dance number where Size Noodles is like leaping around all over the place, and he didn't have anyone to tell him, like, well, the best we can do is rod puppets. So, so I understand that directors, especially those kind of like impresario directors, they want to translate what's in their head to the screen, like with minimal kind of friction in between there. But at the same time, running up against those obstacles, like, it engages this problem solving section of your brain that I would think also sort of appeals to directors. I mean, maybe I'm making a wrong assumption about what appeals to people who become directors, but I would think that that's part of it, is like, all right, how do you figure out how to make this work? And, again, maybe that's like the people who go into the art department, the production designers. Maybe that's who like really engages with that kind of problem solving. But, I would think, I mean, you do lose that, like you said, with Jurassic Park. Spielberg had to sort of do this sleight of hand stuff, and the same with the original trilogy of Star Wars. Like, you kind of just had to sort of work around, and we've talked about, like, well, there's a lot of like the same robots in the background because that's just what they had on hand. But it added this like depth to the universe that they were building. Whereas, when you can say like, no, just, you're not really solving problems with CGI. Like, if you can't get Yoda's expression to be exactly right, you can't say like, all right, well, let's think about this and let's think about a more creative way we can do it so that we're still getting that impression across. Like, instead you're just telling the like computer modeler, like, just do it better. And they're just having to put in like hours and hours, just like trying to get it closer to whatever you want it to be. And so, I mean, yeah, I mean, this is what it always comes down to with me with this like practical effects versus CGI. It's not even necessarily that one looks better than the other, although I've certainly especially when you get into like the physics of things, I've certainly talked enough about how CGI can look really bad, but it at a base level just comes down to that trade-off between like trying to just, I want to get exactly what I want versus, well, I'm probably not going to get exactly what I want. So what's a more creative way that I can like engage this other part of my brain to work around it that might end up being something really cool and that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise, right? Like, that's part of the creative process.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of separates a guy like, Lucas from a guy like James Cameron, who are kind of operate in that same space. But James Cameron, I guess, first and foremost, was a visual artist. He was he draws, he paints. I mean, he worked on tons of sets, doing set. He kind of worked his way up the. I mean, really, all Lucas ever really did before he had his own things is he would kind of work second unit for Francis Ford Coppola,
and he was an editor.
Yeah, he was an editor too. Yeah, so he was much more like, well, I'll take the pieces and make something out of it. And Cameron's more of I'll take, I'll make the pieces, I'll make the tool, I'll do this and that. He was much more hands-on of a director. And although I don't think it ends up, I think the result kind of, it's kind of funny though. I think in the end, it ends up being the same because really it's like as time goes on, James Cameron's movies get more and more soulless and kind of connected to technology as being more of a tech demo than a film. So I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to, I mean, I'm making a lot of suppositions about, if Lucas was in this financial set and, Harrison Ford, he probably wouldn't, he was, getting ready to have one of the best career runs of his life without being connected, The Fugitive and those movies like, regarding Henry and all these kind of like his quote, his arty pieces, that thing. And, Hamill and Fisher were kind of probably would have been more game for it, but who knows,
Yeah, I mean, and that's so now to finally answer your kind of hypothetical question, like, I absolutely don't think Harrison Ford would have done it. For the reasons that you say, and also for sort of what we were talking about either last week or 2 weeks ago with the fact that he is back in this now, and maybe it's now that he's so far removed from it, he's sort of intrigued by the idea of kind of recreating what this character might be like 30 years in the future. Whereas if he was doing it in the 90s, like everyone would just expect him to be kind of like the same Han Solo, even though it would be 15, 20 years in the future. I think the expectations for what the character would be and do probably wouldn't appeal to him. But of course, then if you don't have Han Solo, you need to explain why he's not there. And then what do you do with Leia? And then Hamill, he had his voice acting career had either just taken off or was about to take off. I mean, I can't remember when Batman, the animated series, got really big. It was around that time.
Yeah, it was like mid-90s or something like that.
Yeah, so he yeah, I don't know. I mean, so in some ways I wonder if they wouldn't have been better, or at least if audience expectations might have been different, right? Because if you do the sequels, then you can't really do Yoda, which means you can't do the like CGI version of Yoda that's like flipping around and just I never really liked the fight scene between Yoda and Dooku. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh wow, you get to see Yoda do all this great stuff," and I was like, "Yeah, it felt gimmicky to me." Yeah. And also, I mean, like the facial expressions look off a lot of time, so you don't get that. Maybe they do that with a different character, like a new character who you don't have any expectations about, or you don't have all this like built up history with. And so then you don't turn people off or go like, "Oh, I can't believe they had Yoda do all that." And who knows, maybe if they did the sequel and they did bring even just Hamill or Fisher, especially if Ford did it, although I don't think he did, maybe the dialogue would have been a little bit better because those actors knew George Lucas and they could probably work with him to fix the dialogue within the scene, rather than sort of what we got with the prequels, where you got Samuel L. Jackson or whomever saying like, "Well, I'm just here to do whatever George wants because these are his movies." The actors, the returning actors at least, would have had a little more stake in it, so they might have been able to kind of like fix whatever was going on within the scene that would have otherwise been disastrous. I don't know. I also wonder if we would have gotten more Billy D. Williams to sort of like take over for Harrison Ford. Because I don't know what Billy D was doing around that time.
Not much. I mean, he's probably living off of that. He was probably living off some of that Warner Brothers money when they had to buy him out for his Harvey Dent contract.
Right.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like that might have been, and this is maybe we should move on because this might dovetail into some conversation about some other stuff we're talking about. I keep hearing more and more that Billy D was kind of an insurance policy against losing Han, and we needed that character. And then basically when he decided like, "Oh, okay, I'll come back and I'll do that third movie," it kind of put Billy D. put Lando in a strange position of trying to be like, "Well, I don't get to be that charming rogue anymore, so what do I do?"
Right.
And whether it works or not, it's like he doesn't have he has a lot of fun stuff up front, but then he does kind of seem, even though he blows up the Death Star, it's like it feels like he's taken back seat in that, at least in my opinion, because then the way the editing is focused more on the people on the planet. But anyway,
so we'll put a pin in that.
Yes,
I will say the other last bit about that is that would have been interesting to see what would have happened with the EU stuff, because again, not that first generation of EU stuff in the 70s, but especially in the mid to late 90s, all of that EU stuff was like, okay, what happens in the year to 5, 10 years after Return of the Jedi? So George Lucas would have swept in and said like, "Nope, that's not what happened. These movies are what happened."
Oh yeah, jeez, I never even thought about that.
So on the one hand, right? It would have sort of nipped all this in the bud, and you wouldn't have had 20 years worth of books and comics and whatever that were declared legends or whatever. But then on the other hand, what happens to those 5-6 years worth of books, that they become just these kind of weird artifacts, weird historical sort of footnotes, I guess.
Yeah. Poor Kevin J. Anderson.
Yeah, I'm not crying for him.
I know. That's why I mentioned it, because it's I only feel bad.
I mean, they didn't really fight the Searook?
Exactly. I hope Admiral Dahla's in these movies, but
oh god. So we'll put a pin on that discussion, because I think a lot of what, like you said, a lot of what we're gonna talk about later comes back to it. We did get some recent news, or not really news, but just things to talk about. So about what's really happening in episodes 7, 8, and 9. We found out there's going to be a new character in The Force Awakens called Bullhead, which is just it's someone in prosthetics. We don't really know the significance of it. And Bullhead, to me, sounds like a placeholder name, like Yak Face.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. That's my thing. It's I kind of preferred it before they started getting these names.
I mean, I'm sure Bullhead will acquire a real name at some point, but
Captain Bullhead.
Yeah.
I saw that. I saw that in the notes. I'm I don't remember that, but I looked it up and I realized I had seen it. It's an interesting. I don't think that's a race of Star Wars character we've seen before, and I think they're wearing the rebel orange.
Mm-hmm.
So he's going to be a pilot. And of course, there was some implication he might not be in it very long or whatever. It might just be a passing thing. But still, it's kind of are we thinking that's a mask and not a CG face?
Yeah, I'm guessing that's prosthetics.
Okay. Kind of remind.
I mean, if it's a pilot, I guess there's ways to do it where it's CGI. But even on the prequels, the prosthetics, some of them were pretty elaborate in terms of masks or full on head covering things. So I don't know, but it's an interesting design, and we do get little leaks of this character is going to be in it and that character is going to be in it, and I wonder. Are these the characters? Are we being told about these particular characters for a reason? Are they telling us there's Bullhead person's going to be there, so make sure you watch out for them because they have a cool scene, or is this the opposite? They're giving they're throwing the fans a bone,
right?
Saying all right, you want to learn something about this movie? Here's this Bullhead character, and they're just a pilot, and they're just going to say Red 8 standing by, and then their ship blows up, and that's all you see of Bullhead.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many of these great, you get these teases in the prequels of all these characters, and you're oh, what's this guy gonna be, and what's this guy gonna be, and then it's just oh, he walks across the room and hands somebody something, and you're oh, well, I mean, I guess that's. You're not really cheating people. It's they're not sitting there going, God, these are some really important characters to the film. I don't know. I'm kind of getting, I'm getting that point, hitting that critical mass where it's if I start learning much more about episode 7, then we get into heavy spoilers, and I don't know if I want that.
Right.
And also now that this weekend is the release for Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, then I think that gentleman's agreement that between Disney and Paramount about that they're not going to be promoting Rogue One. They weren't going to promote Rogue One until this came out, so there wasn't as much brand confusion.
Oh, yeah.
I think at least that's the rumor I heard, there was kind of a thing where they're hey, we got, it's that hilarious idea that somehow that the average American is so stupid they can't tell the difference between a Star Wars movie and a Mission Impossible movie. It's wait, is that Star Wars? Well, yeah, who knows? I could probably Maybe I should go out and be amongst people and hear him like, I think that new Star Wars movie's coming out this weekend. It's like,
yeah,
really?
I don't know.
You believe that?
Well, I guess the test will be when Rogue One comes out, and they're like, wasn't this already in the theaters? What? I thought this was out like a year ago.
It's like, I'm like, Mom, it's Star Wars Rogue One's coming. I took you to that Rogue movie last summer. Don't try to pull the wool over my eyes. Of course, I did one time get into a kind of a heated conversation with an in-law about the trying to explain to him that the Quicksilver character in the Avengers is a different character than in the X-Men, that there because of contract things, and he just like, no, they're the same guy. I'm like, no, I mean, one is they had to because they don't own the character. They own the character, but they don't own the. It's the same guy, and I'm like, okay, never mind.
Yeah,
it's the same guy.
Yeah, I mean, it's also tough since Simon Pegg. I mean, I guess he would be talking about The Force Awakens, but since Simon Pegg is in Rogue Nation, like he's getting interviewed now, and so they're asking him about all this Star Wars stuff. So they're not totally like promoting Rogue One, but I mean, you know, it's sort of like a backdoor, like, well, we're also going to ask you about Star Wars stuff. And
yeah, I mean,
so you're a Star Wars fan. What do you think about all these movies coming out? You know,
and that's the thing. It's like, if we've gotten to the point where we can't, brand confusion is just a one word in a title. I mean, it's sad because I remember a few summers when it's like, well, you know, you like a movie about asteroids hitting the Earth. We've got Armageddon and we have Deep Impact. You know, it's like we have Volcano and we have Dante's Peak, and you know, one's always better than the other. So yeah, just let the market decide.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's this thing about Gary Whitta you have on the notes here?
Oh, well, speaking of this brand confusion and not promoting, so Gary Whitta, who's writing or has a hand in writing Rogue One, I guess he just published some novel, you know, some science fiction novel, and so he's getting interviewed about that, but then people are also asking him about Rogue One. And I mean, they really are not letting people talk about this movie, because they're like asking him these questions, and he's like, Gareth Edwards was great to work with. He's super smart. I had a lot of fun writing the movie. It was always a dream to write a Star Wars movie. And that's like as much as he'll give them. He won't even give them like anything else. So it's not, I mean, there wasn't really much notable in there, but except for the fact that like, yeah, they're letting people be interviewed about this thing. But I mean, I can't imagine what punishment they've been threatened with if they let anything out of the bag.
It's all money. It's all guaranteed money. It's like, you keep your mouth shut, just cash the check. You start talking. And supposedly, I haven't really followed his Twitter, but I guess Gary Whitta is a pretty, loquacious Twitterer. Like while he was in the writing process, he didn't let anything slip, but he was pretty, he's pretty opinionated, not afraid. He's not worried. He wasn't too worried about being diplomatic. And now that he's basically left the picture, it's kind of like he's been pretty silent on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, cause I don't know. I mean, I guess if they're filming now, I don't know if they've got him on set doing stuff, or if they brought in someone else to do whatever rewrites they need.
I've heard he's off the picture completely.
Yeah.
Like that he was only signed on for a draft.
Ah, I see.
And I think that, then they start picking it apart, and whereas I mean,
that's the other thing about this interview is like the intro to this interview is like, oh, Gary Whitta had such a good pedigree to write a Star Wars movie. He wrote Book of Eli and After Earth. And I know that any script problems that a movie has are not necessarily the fault of the person credited with writing it, but at the same time, it's like, oh, we're really going to say that because he wrote After Earth, he is like the perfect choice to write a Star Wars movie? Like, is that...
Well, he is the man that
introduced... Is that really what we're coming up with?
He did introduce the concept of ghosting to the world, so I can't hate on him too much. Did you ever see After Earth?
I did not.
Oh, man. You got to treat yourself. Got to treat yourself to a nice. I got it for.
I just assumed that I knew what the twist would be and went about my business.
There's no twist. That's the thing.
Well, I was wrong, but I was like,
you know what the twist is that at 2 hours in, you're like, oh my god, I sat through a Jaden and Will Smith movie.
Yeah.
Where's my time? My time mysteriously disappeared.
The twist is that money is no longer in your wallet.
Exactly. Well, I got it for Christmas. It was on my Christmas list 2 years ago.
I see.
And that's, that's my double feature with Battlefield Earth.
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So we got some other Rogue One news. We got some casting news. Jonathan Aris, who is, I guess, currently on the TV show Sherlock, is going to be in the movie as Senator Jebel or Senator Jebel or something, Jebel, which I kind of hope that he's not on like the rebellion side, because then if you have the rebels and Senator Jebel, and then you have Supreme Leader Snoke, who looks like a snake, like that's too much. Like, just stop it. Right? Like a squid character from the planet Mon Calamari was enough. Like, we don't need to keep going down this road.
Yeah, he kind of looks like an Imperial.
Yeah, I thought so too. I mean, well, he's British, right? So
yeah, he's got that, and he's got those like beady little Eddie Redmayne eyes.
Yeah, I actually couldn't. I've watched all of Sherlock, but I could not remember who he was. They were like, oh, he plays Anderson on Sherlock. And I was like, there's a character on Sherlock named Anderson? Who is that? So I had to go look it up, and he's like the police doctor or something like that. I don't know.
Oh, was he in...
So I think he's not the most memorable actor on that show, I'll say.
So was he in The Hobbit as well?
Oh, I don't know. I saw 2 of those movies, and then I stopped.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it now, and it's just... Oh, he was in The World's End, too, so... He's like one of those guys that you probably won't even... No, it doesn't look like he was in The Hobbit. But, it's... it might be another one of those situations where it's like, if Star Wars were made today, would every single person sitting at that table when Vader force chokes Maudie, would they all be, like, leaked,
Right.
It's like, oh, wait a second. They're all just sitting around a table. I mean, I remember all those...
Only 2 of them have lines anyway.
Exactly. And the deleted scenes for Revenge of the Sith with the birth of the Empire, which, the young...
the young Tarkin or whatever.
Oh, no, it's... Oh, geez, what's her name? The redheaded... Oh, no.
Mon Mothma?
Yeah, she's in it.
Yeah.
And then Bai Ling is in it. Yeah. And it's like there was all this controversy because Bai Ling's going to be in it, and then all of a sudden her scene's been cut, and they're like, I've been punished for appearing in Playboy, and then it's like then you see the scene and you're like, no, because it was ridiculous. The scene was stupid. It was just like them all sitting around with C-3PO serving drinks, and they're all just like, and like even Jimmy Smits' whole shtick in that scene was terrible. Have you seen those scenes?
No, I have not.
It's like he's kind of sitting back, and he does this weird thing with his hand. It's like almost like he's playing some like refined Southern gentleman. Like, oh, forgive me, I don't sound like a separatist. It's just like, what is this? I mean, it was kind of like you don't need. They didn't really need to show the birth of the rebellion. I think it's
so luckily they didn't.
Yes, and it was much better handled in this concept of the cartoon show, where it's like.
Yeah.
They can, they don't have to show all that.
Yeah. So, I mean, so this news, there's not really much to say about the news itself, but I think it brings up a lot of interesting issues about these things, one of which I just thought of right before we started taping, so it wasn't on the thing I sent Robert, so I'm springing this on him.
Okay,
now.
I'm ready.
But do you notice we haven't actually really heard a lot about women joining these movies? Like, almost all of these leaks that we're getting are guys. Like, we know Felicity Jones is in Rogue One. As far as I know, that's the only woman I've heard of in that movie.
Yeah.
And then Episode 7, we have the ones we know about, right? Lupita Nyong'o, Gwendolyn Christie,
Daisy
Ridley, and Carrie Fisher. But then there are like 8 or 10 dudes that we know of in that movie. So I mean, it just all of a sudden I just realized like, oh, we've just been hearing a lot about like men that they're trying to get for these movies, and we haven't heard a lot about like, oh, we're casting this woman and that woman and whatever else.
Yeah, I don't know what I think about that really. I mean, I guess it's like the proof's in the pudding. If it's like all of a sudden, if I watch this movie and it's like, there should have been more women in it, then I have an issue. But
yeah,
I don't know. Are they going to, if Rogue One is a war movie and then they're going to, if somebody in Disney said like, well, we should have a lot of women, but they're like, well, this is going to be gritty. And, our research tracks that they don't want, we don't want to see women with gunshot, laser blasts in them and stuff like that. Although I think, isn't Leia the only person who actually gets directly shot with a laser in all the movies?
So, yeah.
She gets shot.
I mean, I guess
she gets stunned in the first one and shot in the third one.
I guess Luke gets shot in the wrist.
Yeah,
in Jedi.
But it's his bad hand. It's his robot hand.
Right.
So it's not his real hand.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. It's maybe the Rogue One thing kind of makes, every time I hear about it, it's like I feel like every time we do a show, we're reporting like, oh, they're going to start shooting, or they just started shooting. Oh, no, they're going to start shooting in 2 weeks. It kind of is, It's interesting. When we did our whole thing like, oh, they've already started shooting, then all of a sudden Comic-Con, Kathleen Kennedy is like, oh, we're about 3 weeks away from principal photography. Now that one doesn't contradict the other necessarily.
Sure.
There's always a million things where they throw a couple uniforms on some stunt people and take them out to Guatemala in the jungle, and they film next to some of the pyramids, and they're like, that's all we needed. So,
or they're like, okay, well, we have these sets from episode 7, so let's get those scenes out of the way.
Yeah.
Now.
And that could just be like, people getting in, footage of people getting into X-Wings but of course, they can't use the same X-Wings from episode 7 as they're going to have to go back to the original design because it's, 35 years difference. But yeah, I don't know. What's your take on it?
It's just something I noted. I would probably like it if we started hearing a little more about like, oh, it's not just going to be one woman in this movie and a bunch of dudes. Right. I'd appreciate that. And like I said, in episode 7, you have a few more, but you have like twice as many dudes. And I don't necessarily think that like you need an equal number of women and men in these movies, but it would be nice. I mean, that's the thing about like the original trilogy is Leia is seen as this very like strong figure or whatever, but there's just there's just her. And so I wonder if it's going to be sort of similar with Rogue One, where it's like, Felicity Jones's character, she's going to be like this strong, tough, like cool rebel character, but then after that, it's just like, well, we're going to sell toys to the boys or whatever.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, especially because Rebels has done a good job of, they have Hera and they have Sabine, and there have been other women characters on that show to varying degrees of like how much they actually do. But Rebels, I think, has done a pretty good job of, giving, women at least more to do on that show, even if we've complained that they're still not doing enough. But it just seemed like a weird, not even quite a step back, but it was just something I realized like, okay, well, we've got Felicity Jones and then, Riz Ahmed and Ben Mendelsohn maybe. And we heard about, maybe Benicio del Toro for episode 8. And now we hear about Jonathan Aris for Rogue One. And there's someone else attached to Rogue One who I can't remember, but he's some guy. And it's just like, well, I kind of hope that, we have a female lead, but then that's the only real woman of note in this movie.
Yeah. I mean, you can make an argument. Oh, maybe it's going to be quality over quantity that, if Felicity Jones is the focus of the story, does it matter? I mean, I don't know. I'm honestly,
I mean, I guess I would say that
I'm asking because it's the whole idea is, if we put as many women there as possible and that becomes, equal footing, or is having, it's like, well, there was 8 women in the thing and none of them had any agency. And it's like, okay, well, and then, Felicity Jones' character, she's the boss. She has all the agency of the thing. And I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm merely kind of, I'm just, I'm not ready to be like super like sensitive about this. I mean, I definitely, I think that we're getting this feeling that like, Leia's still the boss of the rebellion. Gwendolyn Christie is going to be the boss of her stormtroopers. We don't really know what kind of villain. Oh, jeez, boy, I tell you, I love my brain. That Kylo Ren's going to be. Is he going to be like? Right. Is he going to be like a Darth Vader? But for all intents and purposes, I think he's a one-shot character. I haven't heard anything about Adam Driver being signed on for multiple movies. It's like, it's until you see it. But the problem with that is like, once it's done, then it's done. You can't go back and go, ooh, we got the mixer wrong a little bit. Like, wow, right. We didn't realize that. Like, it seems like, because I know that I never saw the Avengers, but there was a lot of anger towards that movie as far as the way that Scarlett Johansson's character was portrayed. I guess she's kind of a damsel in distress in this movie. And I think it's like, regardless of what you feel about these things, it's like you have to admit that if the damsel in distress thing is such a thing, it literally is a trope. I mean, when I say it, and I'm kind of talking at the listener now, but it's like if it exists, you already know that they're right. It exists, so like maybe they do need to go against it. Right. I'm not, of course, and then again, I'm not. There's a lot of dudes writing these movies, and if we're like, oh, we're going back to the way things were, and then it's like, well, one of the ingredients of those movies, good or bad, is that there isn't a lot of women with a lot to do. Like they're all in titles. They all have titles. They're the Mon Mothma. They're the boss, but they don't have any agency or even like literally it's stripped away like in Jedi. So it'll be interesting. It's that whole thing where it's like I keep thinking to myself, everybody's so excited about Star Wars coming back to what it quote was, and it's like people are making some grand assumptions about what people want in a movie now. I mean, even in 15 years ago when the prequels were coming out, it's different. A lot of this stuff wouldn't want, it would be, rather than kind of grumbling, some of these voices kind of sound like caricatures. I think it would, now if something like that would come out, I think it would be, more of a roar because people are a lot more apt. Sure. It's a lot, no, I don't want to say easier, but it's a lot more common for people to be incredibly outraged by, real or perceived slights, Yeah. So it's like this thing where it's like,
and I want to be clear that like, I'm not saying this because I want to like create some sort of just knee jerk reaction. That's, where I'm, even without seeing the movie, I'm going to say like, oh, well, there should have been more women in it. I guess I
think it's a good question.
I mean, you can have, I guess I would just be worried that it'll get to the point where, right, especially because then we're going to get like a young Han Solo movie and maybe a young Boba Fett movie. And those will, I can't imagine there are going to be like a ton of women in supporting roles in that, in either of those. But just the idea that like they're going to give Felicity Jones the lead in this movie, and then they can say like, oh, well, we made a movie with a female lead. So, these movies, they're great. We're doing great as far as like women are concerned. It's like, well, okay, so why is it just that? Like, why does it have to be the lead or nothing? Right. Like you can create all these nice supporting roles that are women and still make them like interesting characters, or even not. Like, why does that guy that, the main character turns around and says a line to that person and they're like, yeah, okay, I'll get right on that. And then they leave the room. Like, why does that have to be a guy? Maybe that could be a woman too. Or, just things like that where it's
I know.
I'm just wary that they might be treading into like, well, we gave a woman the main role in this movie, so that's good enough, right? Like that's kind of what I'm worried about.
Yeah, and I think that is totally a fair question. I mean, it isn't something I sat around and thought a lot about. But
no,
I guess I guess I
this is
have
something that just came to me.
I haven't thought a lot about that in women in particular. In Star Wars, well, that's not true. I mean, I guess because I'm trying to say I don't really know what I'm trying to say. I'm just trying to
right, and we should acknowledge that this is like two dudes talking about this. So.
I mean, it's just one of these things that personally, on a personal level, sometimes this stuff doesn't occur to me because I'm like 42 years old, and that's some people say, well, that's not that old. It's amazing how old I feel. You know what I mean? It's amazing how quickly you can feel like things that don't occur to you, how quickly you get out of step with, what the zeitgeist of what's important to people, because it's like you're dealing with your own things in life. And time passes and you think, oh, I've already established these. Like when I look at something, these are the 5 things that I notice. And if for some reason, if you haven't kept up to date, you quickly find yourself kind of out in the weeds of like, what's it matter? They've got they got a girl like she's the boss, to me. And then it's like, I would be the kind of guy like, well, if the whole thing's built around here, why are people complaining? But you're right. It's when you get to that point where it's like, why was there only like 2 women on the entire, Hoth base? And they both had the same hairstyle. So I'm sure a lot of people are like, Princess Leia. No, it's me. It's Sue. Oh, hey, Sue. How's it going? Have you seen Leia? Yeah. It's like that kind of, it's like, yeah, if we're going to have if we're going to have alien things and, African American or African English, protagonists and stuff, it's like, let's just go and like, let's keep questioning that casting. Let's keep, let's spice it up.
Let's keep mixing it up.
And also, but I have a feeling that, I don't know much about Kathleen Kennedy as a person, but really she's the boss. She's the boss.
Right.
Bob Iger bought the company with her as the boss. And I don't know how long her contract is. And she has a track record a mile long. It's like, let's hope that's something that means something to her. I mean, you can't not, being a super successful, but as I said, you can't please everyone, but that being said, why not try to please most of them?
Right.
Let's try to, it's interesting because it's like, we could also be ahead of the thing. There could be all kinds of great casting that we don't know about because they don't want to spoil it. But even though spoilers seem to be coming out, Ahsoka Tano could be
casting rumors about.
You could find out, Grace Chloe Moretz as Ahsoka Tano or something in Rogue One, and we're not going to know about it because they're filming it all, and it's going to show up. Right. But then again, it's it could be it could just be like a war movie with dudes.
Yeah. So I think that's a good segue. Again, still talking about Rogue One, but just thinking more about the casting issues. Because I think there was like a tacit acknowledgement that, Rogue One is going to be about these bounty hunters being sent after the rebels who have the Death Star plans or whatever. That means they need to cast all of these bounty hunters. And so I was just thinking about, in particular, Cad Bane and Boba Fett. Because, Forlom and IG-88 are both droids. Like Forlom, you could maybe get an actor who pulls like an Anthony Daniels in it, but IG-88, like that can't be an actor in that. That's not like, it's not wide enough, deep enough for like a suit on someone.
Doug Jones is not that skinny,
right? Like it'll be a puppet if it's anything, or So yeah, just kind of thinking and I should say that it kind of depends on how big these roles are going to be, right? Like we've heard that that's part of it, but maybe everyone's assuming that's going to be a bigger part of the movie's plot than it actually is. I mean, I think I don't even know if it's common enough to be a trope, but it's common enough where you have, sort of a group of assassins all sent out to kill, like, your protagonist or whatever, and then he dispatches them one by one. So I would imagine we're going to see something similar. And so, maybe the first couple, like, Zuckuss and Forlom or IG-88 or whatever, like, their scenes aren't that long. They get taken out pretty quickly. But, especially Cad Bane and Boba Fett, who I would think would be speaking roles. Like, what do we do with them? And they're sort of similar in that they're both kind of, Cad Bane from Clone Wars is this kind of like American Western bandit outlaw kind of character, which is also what influenced initially Boba Fett, at least his voice. So I was thinking Ben Mendelsohn actually would have been a pretty decent choice for Cad Bane, except we know or at least we're pretty sure he's playing him off instead. Right. But what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I'm a traditionalist in some respects. If Jeremy Bulloch is still up and in shape, I don't see why he couldn't put the suit back on, get the cadence right. Yeah. I mean, if he's probably,
or even just do the voice, right? They could just.
Well, did he do the voice though?
I think. Didn't he?
I don't know.
Didn't he ADR it in later?
Maybe he did. Cad Bane, I mean, we established he's like a Duros with like some kind of face.
Right. He has like bluish skin, red eyes. His nose is missing, but that's easy enough to do. You just do it the way they did with what's his name in the Harry Potter movies.
Oh yeah, tape it down.
And I haven't seen those movies, but I thought of this specifically, so I had to look up how they did it, which is they just filmed Ralph Fiennes with his regular nose and everything, and then they just CGI'd it out later on.
Yeah, I mean,
so you could easily just have a guy just running around the set.
I'm just trying to think who would be good. I mean, maybe I'm not the casting. Maybe I'm not really aware of who we have to pick from right now. It's kind of like I've kind of seen so.
Right. I mean, it doesn't seem like they're going for like super famous people.
And also,
Forrest Whitaker would be annoyed with me for saying that.
Yeah. Well, and also, you keep bringing up like, IG-88 Zuckuss gets taken out early. It's like, I mean, they do. If this is all pre-Empire, then like they can't be taken out. And then if it's like, well, are they going to just knock them out? And how exciting is that going to be? Unless, and this just occurred to me, if we're actually looking at this story a little bit differently, is the fact that it, might take place. Some of it they might be like one of those James Bond pre-title sequences of some characters stealing the plans.
Oh, yeah.
Transmitting it to, Princess Leia or whatever. Star Wars happens. And then jump ahead. Vader he gets his stuff back together after whatever and decides to hire these bounty hunters to take out the actual people who stole them. Like they know, it's Felicity Jones' character. It's the other guys. Like, I want you to kill those guys. And that's what
they've already transmitted the plans.
It's like you can't change it. It's not them trying. It's like it's retribution. Even though that seems a little strange. It would be a little inconsequential in the long run but then again, people already know that like whoever is going after these rebels, like they're going to fail essentially. If we're talking the task is getting those plans, because we know the Death Star gets blown up. There's no other way to do it. We know it gets blown up, and then we know all of those bounty hunters, except for Cad Bane, show up 3 years later, having failed.
So there's a lot of like,
considering people get fired for much less.
I guess in this case it's Gary Whitta's job to like get to the problem solving part of his brain and be like, all right, how do I come up with a compelling story where there's no real drama because we know what happens with all of these people who are in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. It's like I'm always expecting suspense. I'm always expecting to learn something. I don't know if necessarily learning. Oh, well, you're learning stuff. You're just learning the behind the scenes, which we've already shown. Walking into the prequels, knowing that it starts out with young Anakin Skywalker and ends with Darth Vader and two twin kids that he doesn't know about, and then all the between A and Z, all the other letters, and it still didn't really satisfy people. It was just that kind of weird filling in. Unless Lucasfilm has, are under the philosophy that filling in the blanks is that's a good. As long as we have our three main movies, we can do the fill in the blank movies all the time. That then we're not required to have as much suspense. We're not, we just have to adhere to these certain points. It's just that whole idea. It's like I'm actually, part of me is not as excited about these anthology films as it's like, I know you've said you made peace with episode 7. You're questioning. It's like, I question the point of them at all. Some of these stories would easily, 10 years ago would have just been a comic book series.
Right.
And now they're movies. And then, because at some point, all this time Lucas has had a TV series that he was going to make, that he wrote 3-4 seasons worth of scripts, commissioned them to have been written.
Right.
Had big writers come in and do it. As far as I know, what's his name that did Battle? He's on Outlander now. He did the reboot. He wrote tons of Star Trek. He kind of looks like George Lucas. He wrote a ton of stuff for it.
Yeah.
I can never remember anybody's name today. But
what's his name? The Battlestar Galactica reboot guy.
Yeah, that's what
he got brought.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm blanking on his name. Ron something.
Yeah, Ronald D. Moore. Ronald D. Moore. He wrote a ton of scripts for it, supposedly.
Yeah.
And why are those not viable? Maybe it's because it's just the sheer cost of a show. I heard that they were thinking that every episode was budgeted out to $3 or $4 million.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's Lost, which I think was the most.
Although hell, The Simpsons spends that on their voice cast. So.
Yes. And he's worth every penny. I don't know. It's maybe they just it wouldn't work it wouldn't work as a TV show or something.
I mean, in some ways, I wonder if there's like to justify the fact that they are getting rid of this canon, because you said like these could easily be a comic book or like even a novel. I mean, hell, they're right. They wrote novels about like the history of the Millennium Falcon or the history of, about all these people who worked on the Death Star before Golden Globe. They could easily crank out a novel about, how the people who got the Death Star plans, or, we've already had young Han Solo books. But now it's like, well, we got rid of those to start over. So what if we make a movie instead? Because that will cost a lot more, but it'll also make us a lot more money than, selling a couple 100,000 copies of this new young Han Solo novel.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun and I'll go see them. I mean, I guess if Rogue One's really bad, then I'll probably have to rethink my approach to the other anthology movies. But I mean, I'm still planning on going to see them, and I still, when I read stuff about them, I'm like, oh, that's kind of neat, and I kind of want to learn more. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. Picking that story to start from, there's a lot of like questions about it where you go like, wow, I kind of wonder how they're going to get around this, and I wonder how they're going to get around that, and how are they going to address this, and how is this going to happen? And it's, maybe they don't. Maybe they just sweep all that aside and they just say like, look, this is a bunch of bounty hunters going after a small group of rebels, and we'll just, we'll make you care about those characters and hope you forget about all of these larger questions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's just, maybe I'm not the demographic. You know what I mean?
I think that's probably. I mean, yes and no. Like,
although I said something, I think a couple weeks ago, I said, "Oh, maybe the new movies are for the new demographic, and the anthology movies are to please old farts like me." It's like, that's not the Star Wars I know, you know?
Right. I mean, yeah. On the one hand, you could say we're not the demographic because. You're right. We're gonna have that reaction maybe, or we've built up all this history and all of these like cynicism about Star Wars movies. But then on the other hand, if we're not the target demographic, then why go back to like this period in time? Why go back to the events of A New Hope? Why not create something new or go to something that people who grew up with the Clone Wars would be interested in? Rather than people who grew up with A New Hope. I mean, so the story idea came from John Knoll, who is he's probably a little older than we are. I mean, he's definitely older than I am. Yeah, but I don't know if
John Knoll is in his.
He's probably in his 50s now. But he's still of that generation, and so this is his idea, right? Like, you would think it would be an idea that would appeal to people of the same or a similar generation. So maybe it is meant for us. I don't know.
It's supposed to be, Star Wars is supposed to be for everybody, man.
That's right. Fun for the whole family.
John Knoll is 52.
Yeah, there you go. So that was just a lot of speculation, fun talking about casting these movies. But we do actually have real news to talk about with regard to the comic books.
Yay, comics!
Yay, comics! I guess. Like I said, I've been reading comic books for exactly like 2 years. So I don't know, but I am reading the Star Wars comics. So
yeah, I have a complicated history with comics too.
So the first bit is we're going to get a new comics miniseries based around Chewbacca that's going to start in October. And we found out about this either right before or during Comic-Con, I think. So this is not like new news, but we haven't talked about it yet. So it's going to be like a 5-issue miniseries similar to what they're doing with Lando and what they did with Leia. It's going to be set in the same time period, just after A New Hope. So they're still kind of working in that area. And I think it's notable that at least in the Star Wars, the new Star Wars comic, Chewbacca is basically hasn't been there at all. Like Han and Leia, even in the current storyline, like those two are off on their own, and they had to spend a panel with Leia being like, "Where's Chewie?" And Han was like, "Duh, I told him to stay home," and he wasn't happy, but he did it. So like Chewbacca hasn't really been around much lately in the Star Wars canon, we'll say. So this is, I guess, going to sort of explain why that is, maybe, which is he's crashed on some planet. They didn't say what planet it was. He's marooned there. The planet is caught between the Empire and the Rebellion, and he's working with some short-haired woman. I don't know why that they like described her as a short-haired woman, who I guess will be his, yeah, who I guess will be like his sidekick on this mission. So that's it. So that's the new Chewbacca comic. What do you think, Robert?
Well, I like Chewbacca. Yeah,
sure. Who doesn't like Chewbacca?
Everyone likes. Hey, my youngest niece Zoe, she loves Chewbacca. She's so much so that she goes, I don't like Star Wars, Uncle Robert, but I do like Chewbacca, and I do like Luke. I do like Luke Skywalker. I do like Princess Leia, but I don't like Darth Vader. And I don't understand why you have so many pictures of Darth Vader in your house, which really bothers her because she's freaked out.
Because he's evil, right? What do you have?
Right. It's like, why do you have all this weird stuff on your wall? He's always been an interesting character for them to depict because obviously he's He's obviously nonverbal in the sense that you never quite know. Everything is always interpreted through somebody else. You never quite know what he's actually saying. It's like, is what's his thought process? Is he more like a dog? Is he like kind of a sentient dog where he just kind of
right.
goes like loyalty and, you know, big emotions? I mean, his subtlety to is he philosophical? You know, that kind of idea. So those aren't things they can impart. I know that that is one of the reasons that he got earmarked for, quote, destruction in some of the later EU books, is that they couldn't think of anything to do with him because, like, you know, the written word, if he's not being written about, he essentially ceases to exist. It's not like in a movie where you can just go, you know, well, we'll just put him over there and he'll fiddle with the controls. And
and he'll like comment on things occasionally.
Yeah. And so that was like, you know, I know that there was some Star Wars Tales solo Chewbacca stuff in the past where it would always be like he'd go back to Kashyyyk and it would be like a little bit of the prodigal son returns kind of thing, where there would be this story where like, oh, you know, you're off doing your fancy rebellion while we're here on Kashyyyk, you know, living a hard life in the mines kind of attitude. But, you know, if it means we get a more impressionistic story, I'm all for it. Really good art, vistas, action. I think one of the things that we're suffering from in this new spate of Star Wars things is it's too wordy. It's too much plot. There's not, you can't do the, you know, to quote my writing teacher in college, you can't really luxuriate in the story because it's all just bam, 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 bam.
Yeah. And especially with these like 5-issue miniseries.
Right. Now, if we have this short-haired character, if she's just merely reacting to him all the time to move the story along, then it's going to be boring. It's going to be like, it's just going to be another type of story, but with Chewbacca in it, you know. Unless, like I said, if we learn something bigger about the Wookiees, which, you know, is another, even though they had a good run in episode 3, I feel like, and in the Star Wars Christmas special, it's like they are totally one of the underutilized races in Star Wars, where it's like, you know, I was thinking about this the other day. I'm going to do real quick diversion about how Lucas complained that when he was writing episode 3 that he had to, like, he wanted to do this primitive versus technological battle, and that's where the Ewoks sprung from, because originally it was supposed to be the Wookiees, and it's just like, and I always kind of call BS on that, because it's like, you know, we don't know enough about it. He could have made an even more interesting Jedi and he could have raised the stakes up a whole bunch by having it set on Kashyyyk instead of Endor. You know, the whole concept, but anyway, yes. I guess my short answer is yes. I fully endorse the idea of Chewbacca getting his own solo run on this.
Yeah, I mean, there's something you pointed out that came up. So we got this news through an interview that I guess MTV.com did with the people who are going to be working on it. And the interviewer raised a similar point, which is that up until now, like in the movies and things, we've only really understood who Chewbacca is just in relation to other characters rather than on his own, right? So he's Han's co-pilot and friend. He's the guy who, you know, he's there on Kashyyyk when Yoda, you know, he helps rescue Yoda or whatever. You know, it's we never get to see him just kind of like on his own doing stuff without sort of the other main characters that we know more about being there to like guide him. So I think it will be interesting. I mean, with this kind of short-haired woman sidekick, I assume she'll be there to interpret for him, you know, for the reader, because he'll like, you know, bark something, and then she'll, you know, the way that she responds to him will sort of tell you, oh, okay, so he must have asked this question or whatever. You know, it's a way to get around that issue that he doesn't speak basic, he doesn't speak English. So the other thing I was thinking about is I wonder how many of these miniseries we're actually going to get. Because if you know, Aftermath is going to take place right after Return of the Jedi. There's a way to sort of build this up to The Force Awakens. But now that they've cleared out all the old EU stuff, they have this, you know, 2-3 year period in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back that they can fill in with new stories. And so I wonder if they're going to be using the comics to kind of to do that. I mean, they're already doing it with Star Wars and Darth Vader and the other miniseries that they've been doing. So I guess I just wonder if we're going to see more original trilogy characters get their own miniseries, right? Because Leia's had one, Chewie now, Lando has one that we'll talk about in a minute. Vader has his own full series. Obi-Wan Kenobi isn't getting his own series, but he's getting a couple standalone issues of Star Wars.
Right.
So I mean, I don't know. Do you think what other original trilogy characters, I guess, would you want to see get their own like 5-issue miniseries?
Well, it's funny because so now are we talking like, can we jump around on timelines and stuff like that?
We could. I mean, just now I was thinking about that there's this gap in between episodes 3 and 4, but now there's also this gap in between episodes 3 and 6. Or I'm sorry. There's this gap between 4 and 5, and now there's also this gap between episodes 3 and 4. So yeah. I mean, we could get updates on lots of characters and what they've been doing. I mean, it does seem though like at least initially they're sticking with that kind of original trilogy era.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of maybe getting into. I mean, since Dennis Lawson has declined to participate in Force Awakens, some of his a Wedge thing. Now there's kind of a blank slate. They can either have him be around or not around, or on missions or just retired or whatever. You could have some stories with him. I always found that he was kind of underused. I'm trying to think. The Lars character. I mean, Owen and Beru Lars. I mean, there's a story to be told there. What happens? What happens to a couple that basically is foisted upon their step nephew, and being like, yeah, you basically, the most evil guy, or his father has gone crazy and killed his mother essentially, and you need to hide this kid here, and that they're living on a frontier, which it's established in Attack of the Clones is a little more dangerous than we were led to believe in the past. It's like there's that might be a good run. I honestly don't know. You'd have to have a pretty deft storyteller to be able to. I mean, there was a great thing. I think it was called Star Wars Visions. It came out around right after Revenge of the Sith, and they were what do they call apocryphal Star Wars stories,
right? And
there was a great one about a resurrected Darth Maul with spider legs, which they eventually cribbed again for the Clone Wars, attacking the son of was he coming after? Yeah, he was coming after Kenobi or something. I don't know. And it became this big battle between Obi-Wan and Darth Maul in the desert not far from the Lars homestead, which ended with, eventually, Darth Maul being vanquished for good this time, and then the very angry Owen Lars banning Obi-Wan from their property, which hence became the origin of that. That wizard's just a crazy old man, blah 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 kind of thing. Because it's like it's established they have a relationship of some sort, and I think we talked about this before, that it went at some point it went from being a stewardship to being tense to being get off my property kind of. And I would be interesting to see where that goes, but then again, that might dip into the whole rumored Obi-Wan Kenobi movie that
right.
I mean, Joel Edgerton said he's up to playing it again. His career is really skyrocketed since that movie. It was a pretty minor thing, but he said he said basically if I got to do something, I'd want to do it. But if it's just going to be me saying, "Hi, I'm your stepbrother," he says, "I'm not interested." So, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that could be interesting. And I mean, on a similar vein, like I could see them doing, maybe not even the early years, but sort of what Jabba the Hutt was up to around that time. And Guillermo del Toro was interviewed not that long ago about whether he would do, whether he would be interested in directing a Star Wars movie. And he said if he would, his idea would do like a Godfather movie trilogy, but with Jabba the Hutt. Which I don't know if you could get a movie trilogy out of that. That seems like you're kind of pushing it, but maybe that would work better as a comic run, as not even that grand of a scope, but just a story about what Jabba's up to, and because we've seen him pop up in the Darth Vader comic already, and so maybe kind of all right, that shows him interacting with Darth Vader, but then what is he doing the rest of his time around then, and interacting with all the bounty hunters and smugglers and whatever, and sort of orchestrating things. The problem with Jabba is that he doesn't move around that much, so it would just be like. You would have to focus mostly on other. You would either have to focus mostly on other people who then go and talk to Jabba periodically, or it would have to be a kind of like palace intrigue story with Bib Fortuna and whomever else is hanging around his palace, which they've already kind of done in the EU, and so I don't know if they would want to like step over the old ground.
Well, what you're forgetting, John, is in the special edition, I was able to establish that Jabba can move around.
True. Yeah, I guess he can move a little bit.
Yeah,
that's true.
I mean, by Jedi, he's
in terms
far
of
worse.
and in terms of like comic panels, he's not the most like dynamic. Right, you can't really show him just like slowly slinking along the floor and have it be the most action-packed page you've ever seen.
Yeah, it might make a good book. I mean, I like Guillermo del Toro. He's kind of hit and miss with me. Some of his movies, it's like usually with him, it's like every other one of his movies I like.
Right.
Which I don't, and I definitely don't think he's suited for the Star Wars universe. He's got too much of an Artur's kind of eye to things. His stylized. I will say I kind of wish I had seen his Hobbits instead of Peter Jackson's, but he's got a fledgling writing career going with that Chuck Hogan, where he's done The Strain, which is a TV show on FX.
Right.
My wife read the first book and said it was pretty good. So I mean, maybe like a book series or something. If he wants to pitch that, but I don't think he's a good fit for a Star Wars, even if he thinks Jabba the Hutt's kind of in his wheelhouse. I wouldn't endorse it.
Yeah. I mean, the other character I was thinking of, and this gets back to your question about like jumping around in time, would be Yoda. I mean, we could either see him in between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, sort of before we meet him in Empire Strikes Back, or even, in between episodes 3 and 4. I don't think the EU stuff ever really dealt with what he was doing during his exile on Dagobah. Like, I think even there was like conflicting accounts within the EU of like why he was living, why his hut was where it was and sort of what he was doing there. But I don't think they ever really dwelt on it very much. So there's a lot of room there, I think, to show, I guess, what he's doing there. That's an instance where you would have to have sort of the action come to him, I guess, if he's sort of like with Obi-Wan Kenobi, like if he's in hiding on this planet, like he's not going to like go flying around the galaxy and revealing himself. But I could especially if it's just 5 issues, I could see maybe constructing a story around something, someone crashing there on Dagobah and like him having to deal with them and how that plays into his larger role within the the Force and the Star Wars story. That could be an interesting idea.
Yeah, that would be. I think that could be a great way for you to kind of reestablish this character that he plays when Luke first lands. This whole idea of a ruse, and maybe it could be like a great thing where somebody, I don't even know how you would do this because, Jedis are so all wise, but maybe an imposter shows up.
Yeah, could be.
And, it's this idea that he's so excited he takes on this tutelage thinking that this is the son of Skywalker. Mm-hmm. And then slowly but surely he begins to realize this is not who I think. I don't know if you could do that with an 800-year-old, all-knowing, omnipotent, godlike Jedi. So it begs the question if if that would actually work with the character. But I kind of like the idea, like, oh, that's why he vets people a little bit. That's why he doesn't say, oh, you've come. Well, I mean, it's self-explanatory that he does vet him because he knows that young people are impetuous and he says, I've been watching him or something like that.
Right.
So he's been so maybe
and in Rebels. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and Yoda, at least his voice has shown up in Rebels so far.
Oh, it has?
Where he's sort of guiding Kanan and Ezra through the Jedi Temple and sort of helping illuminate what the reasons they're there. So, I mean, at least that's the time period right before A New Hope. He's doing stuff. I mean, he's sort of keeping his eye on things. So maybe that could be interesting.
Of course, then
if someone goes to train with him, then
that might end up in Rebels, though. I mean, they might, season 3, they might end up on Dagobah. I mean, they are Ezra and what's his face? They're not full. They're Kanan. They're not full Jedis. I mean, they're
true.
One of them lost his ability to get direct training, and one of them has never had direct training. I mean, I don't know. It is kind of limitless about all the things that they can do. I mean, that's the thing. It's like comic books in some respects. It's like it's a slow process. It's you can only use 22 pages generally, and it's like you can always impart so much information, which I think is one of those things where it's like,
although as you alluded to earlier, boy, they're trying.
Oh God, they're trying, especially with this, with the main. Well, the Vader one I thought was the thing, and I think that we'll be talking about this. Lando comic successfully avoided it in most respects, except for one big glaring issue that both you and I have had with the first issue of Lando. Even though it's not a deal breaker, but it was kind of like an annoyance.
Right. But in terms of like packing, just cramming as much information into every panel and every page, like they're really trying to get that done.
Yeah.
Because again, like,
and that's, if
they're spending 5 issues on it, they have to do a lot.
It's kind of, I don't know. It's like it's not my favorite way to have a story told. I think about I go back to these, I keep going back to my box of old Star Wars comics to go and kind of look at some of the stories and say to myself, oh, are these still good? Are these, is this something that the 7-year-old me liked, but now I don't? And generally they kind of hold together. I mean, they are chatty. The art's inconsistent. I mean, yeah, everybody looks a lot more consistent, even though, like you said, Han looks a lot like Bill Maher. But I just feel like this, like, I don't think they felt like they were in such a goddamn hurry. Which is weird. Because it's like, maybe that's because comic books were a sure thing back then. Now they're more of on the decline. They're more of they have to constantly, everything has to be amped up because otherwise people won't buy them.
Right.
Whereas it's like people used to read comics just because, like, well, I got to find out what the next part of the story is, and this is how you do it. There were no books.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I guess. So we've been speculating again about what we'd like to see, but there's one other thing we will be seeing in November, which is an official crossover event between the Star Wars comic and the Vader comic. And they've already been essentially showing elements of the same story from multiple perspectives, and you have overlapping scenes. So you'll have like essentially the same scene show up in one comic and as in the other. But now they're like officially, the Star Wars people are going to be writing a Vader story, and the Vader people are going to be writing a larger Star Wars story. So the quote from the interview about this is quote, "The core image is Vader against the entire Rebel army and fleet." Basically, Vader is stuck behind enemy lines, and he has to figure out how to get back to the Empire and take everyone on. And then in addition to that, you have this Dr. Aphra, who's again this kind of like droid archaeologist. She gets to meet Han Solo. There's like an evil Wookiee in the Vader comic, and so we've been promised Wookiee fights. So maybe that Wookiee meets up with Chewbacca. You basically have an evil protocol droid and astromech droid in the Vader comic, so they're going to meet up with R2 and 3PO. This kind of overlapping aspect between the two comics is one that I've liked a lot about them, but I'm not sure how I feel about this like big, event crossover idea, especially as they've been describing it. But what do you think?
I'm cynical. I'm very cynical.
Yeah.
I read this book a few years ago called it's like the untold story of Marvel Comics, and it basically consistently portrayed a company that would manufacture these quasi events just to basically sell comics. Which, I mean, I know comic companies' job is to sell comics, but it was like they didn't have a respect for, you're not just selling Spider-Man, which, we can reboot Spider-Man every 2 or 3 years, and it seems like nobody cares. You can't reboot Star Wars constantly because it's not that kind of story. It's indelibly connected to actors in live action people, that's you can't all of a sudden change the way they look or change their genuine motivations. And crossovers it always feels like, it's almost like a wash. And it's like, we're gonna bring all these things together, and they all fight each other, and then something happens that you can never, the characters that aren't the characters that you need to have come back get killed off, or they all get you someday and they fly away, or the characters that, I need this because I can't kill off Darth Vader. It's like then he gets something, some force majeure happens, or whatever, and they escape. It's this kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little cynical too, especially when I think about the evil droids are going to meet 3PO and R2. It's I have enjoyed having the evil droids there.
It's the Seinfeld
and part of the fun of having them is you get to make that comparison in your mind without actually having, it's like a Flintstones and Jetsons thing.
Oh yeah, that's probably better than I keep thinking of that Seinfeld episode with the Bizarro Kramer, and Bizarro George, and Bizarro Jerry. Yeah,
but they made that I'm thinking of the movie or whatever that I probably saw when I was 8 or 10 or whatever. Right, the Flintstones meet the Jetsons movie.
Yes,
it's I don't have to see that. I mean, again, I did see it when I was 8 or 10 or whatever. But
hey, Bob, they got a robot to clean up all this dinosaur shit. Is that pretty much how they?
Basically,
yeah.
I can't remember if it took place in. I'm sure they did both. That happened, but then the Flintstones went to the future or something. But it's the issue you pointed to is something similar with, Han Solo having this wife now, where it's we never hear about her again in the movie that takes place after this happens. So they have to construct it. I mean, they don't have to. They probably won't. But in order for this to really be fulfilling, I think they have to construct it in such a way that the fact that you never hear about this again in the movie that takes place after this happens, that makes sense in your mind. Oh, okay, no wonder he didn't mention this or whatever. And I don't know that they're realistically going to be able to do that.
Well, yeah, it's it just kind of sees. I mean, I don't expect them to reinvent the wheel on storytelling, but it really is one of those things where they're probably going to set up where it's the equivalent of and then she's gone, never to be spoken of again. It's okay,
right?
I don't know. Maybe I'm just not a comic guy. I mean, I'm jumping ahead. I enjoyed the Lando thing. I did.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about it. So Lando #1 came out, I don't know, last week, a couple weeks ago. We've actually been meaning to talk about this Lando comic for months.
Right.
And other stuff's come up, and so we just haven't talked about it. But so now we actually have an issue #1 of Lando. So let's talk about it. So what have you thought so far?
I like the art a lot.
Yeah,
I really do. It kind of almost reminds me of almost like the art way that the Empire Strikes Back Burger King glasses. I know that's kind of a stretch, but it's like that kind of like the cool color, like 80s colors. Mm-hmm. It's impressionistic a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not in like a weird, like there was this guy, Bill Sienkiewicz, that did a lot of like Electra Assassin and stuff that was almost like, it was like oil paintings that were just crazy distortions and stuff. But this is more very stylized. It's like, you know, maybe over, you could say like Patrick Nagel almost in some respects. Mm-hmm. I like the story. I like the fact that we're coming in. This is a pre-Cloud City, post Millennium Falcon Lando.
Right.
He's kind of down on his luck, but he's got an idea. I mean, he's got a concept of where he is in the universe and how he needs to.
He owes a guy some money. He's trying to pay it back. He's doing these sort of heist jobs for money.
Yeah.
But he still got Lobot by his side.
Yeah, that's a big plus for me. I like Lobot. There's one thing I don't like about Lobot, that he mentions that he has implants every time he speaks.
Oh, I know. Like every page that Lobot is on, he keeps saying, "Well, my implants, blah 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 blah." Sometimes those are my implants.
And then when he's trying to sell, like they're doing a like an Ocean's 11 kind of.
Right.
An Ocean's 11 kind of heist they're getting. Well, actually, they did it. They do the heist in the first issue. The heist is done.
Yeah.
Which is a little disappointing, but I'm willing to go with it because it's like he's got some kind of like,
the story isn't the heist; it's the repercussions. From the heist.
They're like these ballet cat, martial art cat things that they.
Yeah, I couldn't figure out what was happening,
and that's fine because I like that kind of stuff. I like it when they don't overthink like the idea that, again, I'm going to refer back to the old Marvel. In the first like 12 months or the first 2 years, there was a whole subplot which was a Magnificent Seven ripoff. It was like 7 against the galaxy or 8 against the galaxy. It was Han and Chewie and a bunch of weird looking aliens and Jackson the bunny is literally a rabbit.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I remember that.
And I love that whole idea that like nobody thought like, oh, is that a bunny rabbit? It's just like, are these blue cats that do ballet and have fighting rods? Like, yeah. Okay. As long as the story's good. And I think the story's good. I mean, I think it's actually, to be perfectly honest, because, like this theory we've been dancing around that, Lando is the most underutilized character in the Star Wars universe, is that this is so far this has been my favorite because of all the comics, because I honestly don't know if I care what happened between the movies to these established characters. It's like, it's once you've seen them take on the Death Star, take on the Empire, to turn their back on smuggling, seeing them dealing with like mundane issues of like diplomacy and like, I don't need to know how, I don't need to hear that Luke was like, I don't want to be a Jedi, I'm going to quit. I don't need that stuff because I'm going off, and I'll go back to Lando. It's just Lando's like he's kind of a blank slate as far as, characterization, because even in the EU they've never been able to handle him properly. The only thing I would say is which is going to be weird to give praise to Kevin J. Anderson, but in the Jedi Academy trilogy there was this whole idea that he tracked down he was involved in some kind of, maybe that wasn't the one. Was there like some kind of weird like space horse racing subplot in that he was involved?
Oh yeah, because he found a guy, or they found a guy who like kept winning, like more than you would expect him to win, and so Luke sent Lando out to like see if maybe it's because he was using the Force and like to like he got like a premonition of who would win, and it turns out no, he was just a scammer.
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, I liked that part of it. So I mean, those little kind of things. It's just like this whole, you know, I guess I have to make peace with the fact that he's always going to be characterized as, you know, devious and you know, always trying to pull a fast one. But you do get a little bit of his personal philosophy when he talks to Lobot about, he seduces a woman basically into giving her this thing that he could easily steal on his own. So and then he kind of talks about like, oh, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen. And he actually seemed like he wasn't as callous about it. I mean, he's still a thief. But he actually has a code. Right. Where I don't know if Han had a code, you know?
Right. I mean, yeah, I guess in the EU we learned, you know, Han didn't like slavery. But beyond that, like, he was pretty much open to whatever.
Right.
And Lando, yeah, you get it. You know, Lando he's kind of he'll seduce a woman to steal her art or whatever, but he's still a gentleman. He's not going to like kill her, even though he easily could have, and you know.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm with you. I really like the artwork in this, and especially the color palettes that they've been using, and you know, every location, at least in this first issue, like every location gets a different color palette, so that you know sort of. You know, like, because the Leia one, and I keep coming back to the Leia one. I probably didn't dislike the Leia miniseries as much as I'm making it sound, but it is my least favorite of the group. But, you know, Leia, like, no matter where you were, it was just, like, white background with kind of, like, pinkish, light bluish decoration. Like, every location essentially looked the same to me. Whereas here you get very clear, like, demarcation of, like, okay, now they're in this bar, and now they're in this bedroom, and now they're in this, you know, throne room, whatever. And, yeah, I mean, it's... You know, the story itself. So Timothy Zahn wrote essentially like an Ocean's 11 and Star Wars novel towards the end of the EU's
Scoundrels.
Was that? Yeah, which I didn't read because he also wrote this novella that was like a prequel to Scoundrels, and I was like, well, I'll read that, and if I like that, I'll read the full book. And I didn't like the novella that much, even though the novella was more like Lando focused. It just wasn't. It's still like Lando's face was on the cover of this thing, but then he basically was just like a minor character. You know, in terms of Lando stories, I think my favorite's probably the one from the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. Which I don't. I mean, the other two storylines from that trilogy kind of bored the hell out of me. But you know, the Lando story, it reminded me a lot of those 70s novels where they're kind of like weird and kind of mystical, and there's you know, races that have these weird powers and things, and it's Lando and Lobot and 3PO and R2 basically chasing down this mythical spaceship who just like shows up, and they go and they end up like entering the ship somehow, like through the hull, and so then they're like on this spaceship, and they try to figure out like what it is and how they get around and how to get out of it and everything. That was probably my favorite Lando story. But other than that, yeah, like then he becomes like the general or whatever, and then he's just in charge of a fleet or a battle, and he does pretty well, and then that's the end of it. They don't really use him in many other ways. So, you know, the fact that where he is now, I'm fine with that. Sort of the repercussions of the heist rather than the heist itself, I'm fine with. I'm still sort of wary. I guess maybe it's because I like Lando so much that I'm like, oh, I don't want them to screw this up. So I'm cautiously optimistic, but I want to see what that second issue is like before I am ready to say like, oh, okay, I feel comfortable with where this is headed or not.
Yeah.
I mean, so Yeah, I mean, we talked about how much we like the color palettes or whatever, but the weird thing is that like Lando looks different in almost every panel.
Yeah,
which is and there was an interview with the writer Charles Soule, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, a while back, like months ago when we were first going to talk about this, and he was like, "Oh, the artist I'm working with, like he really nails Lando like immediately." And then I read issue 1 and I was like, "He does?" Because he looks pretty. And this is part of the more like impressionistic style that you were talking about, but he's still like even like the width of his face and like where his nose and eyes are and his mouth, like it just changes around all the time, and I'm like, wait, what am I looking at here? Is this is still Lando, right? Like,
yeah, I don't see a lot of fidelity in the that's
which is fine. It doesn't have to be, but
yeah, I mean that's such a throwback to like that 70s thing where there's not a lot of consistency in the way it's drawn. It's almost like my critical thinking kind of shuts down and I just kind of go into it. I'm like, oh, it's not great. It's not a great because it's like I'm getting so, like I said, I have a complicated past with comics because I go and I read them and then I get sick of them and I just get rid of them all. And it's every time I pick up everything is so like close to photorealistic now. It's like, why am I reading this? You know, why is this? What am I getting out of this? It's just like watching a movie that doesn't move. Mm-hmm. And it's, this one, some of the great composition shots, this Tauren character that shows up, that sets up Lando for this deal because Lando owes him money, and his little like ugly old man mosquito looking things that interpret him, and it's like they have a text for him talking and it's so small and it's like you zoom in. I'm on my iPad and I look at it and there's nothing you can't. Yeah,
I just assumed that you weren't supposed to be able to read it. You just thought like, okay, he's like muttering something, and then
he seems to draw aliens better than people, that's for sure, but I'm all right with that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean the other issue, like we've talked about, it is pretty wordy, and so this writer Charles Soule, I guess he's because I don't read comics, and they were now saying like, oh, these people are working on this thing. I was like, well, I guess I should see if they're any good. So he wrote Death of Wolverine, and She-Hulk. His run on She-Hulk was apparently very well regarded, but She-Hulk, I guess, was a lawyer. And Soule himself is a lawyer, and so it was basically structured like a legal drama, from what I gather. And so, a legal drama lends itself to a lot of dialogue and this back and forth between, the lawyer and the witness and whatever. This first issue of Lando, I'm willing to give a pass just because it's the first one, and they have a lot. They only have 5 issues, and so they have a lot to set up in order for the next 4 to sort of play out.
Yeah.
But I mean, if it keeps being this dialogue heavy, like I am not sure, because we get all this dialogue like setting up the story, and then like you said, the heist itself is basically a page or two. Or like, oh, and then this heist will happen, and then we'll get away, and that's what happens. Like nothing goes wrong, everything goes to plan. They just steal the ship and then they leave. So I'm just hoping that that's not going to be a trend that continues through the rest of the issues. Which, I mean, I wish they kind of didn't for this one, and maybe the Chewbacca one and maybe the Leia one, but I think Leia was fine ending when it did. But even so, not, because they kind of had to rush at the end. Like, I kind of wish they didn't put an end point on these miniseries. They just said, like, all right, we're going to tell this story, and then they tell the people working on it, like, however many issues you need to tell this particular story, have at it. If that's 5 issues, great. If that's 7 issues, if that's 10 issues, whatever you think you need to do. But, like, we just want you to tell, like, story X, rather than tell them, like, okay, we want you to do a 5-issue miniseries. Now come up with something that then we'll just try to cram into 5 issues.
Yeah.
Because you get a lot of pacing problems. Or at least with the Leia comic, we've seen a lot of pacing problems, and I'm just worried that it's going to come up with this Lando one again.
And there's precedent. I mean, they've always, back in the day, they always used to have the quote, limited series. They wouldn't necessarily say, oh, it's going to be this. They might just say limited series, and then at the end and then they might say the month before, they might go, next month, the finale.
Right.
It's like, yeah, that's the arc. I mean, the concept of the arc. It's, why can't they just let these, if they're really trying to, I don't know why they need all this symmetry. I mean, what's the point? What's the point of having all the symmetry? Is this because everything is like 5 months and everything needs to end by December or something? Is that like,
because even then, I think some of these comics, they're issuing like 2 issues of it in a month sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and also they're already running into issues with the Star Wars comic, where it's like, now we're going to they left us a cliffhanger with Han's wife, and then there's going to be it was like a month off, and then
this month it's a standalone Obi-Wan,
and then there's story. Well, then I think didn't we miss a whole month though? It came out.
I think so.
It came out very early in June, and then it didn't come again till the very end of July. I mean, comic. They always slip their ship dates. I mean, that's comic books, but now they're gonna. So now it's like going to be another 2 months before we even get a resolution, which to me really makes me feel like, oh, it was just a red herring. It's going to be resolved in 2 panels, and it was. Because comic books, they have no shame. It's like the whole idea where it's like, we're killing Superman this month, and then like 6 months later he's back. It's they have no shame doing that. Yeah, and it's not like movies. It's not like like they kill people. Well, there's a lot of that going on with Game of Thrones now because a character died, and now people are going like, he didn't cut his hair. He still has a beard. He was at Wimbledon, and he still has a beard. He still has long hair. He's not dead, And it might just be like he thinks he looks good like that,
Yeah.
You never know. Yeah, off topic again.
No, it's fine. But yeah, I do think, and maybe this is selfish of me again, just because I love Lando so much, but, I do think he's pretty underdeveloped, and you've talked about how he's pretty underdeveloped. At least in comparison to sort of what we think of as the other kind of main, what I call the family photo at the end of Return of the Jedi, where, you have, over the end credit music, you have Luke and Leia and Han and, 3PO and R2, and Lando's there, like, clapping his hands along to the music, right? And that's, like, the final image before you go out, right? Especially when you think about all of those other characters that got... even someone like Wedge, got all of those Rogue Squadron comics and books, and he got to, be in relationships with people, and he married, right. I guess Lando married someone eventually, but
really,
I want to say,
I think I checked out by then.
I certainly had, but I think I remember reading that recently that, like, in the old EU, like, eventually he married someone, but they basically use him as like, well, we don't really know that much about him, so we're certainly not going to try to like invent anything new. We just know that he's a general, so he'll just be, flying ships around, and then he'll retire, and then he'll just be retired, and then he'll be like, I'm retired, leave me alone.
Yeah, I mean, he's always portrayed as that. He's that uncle that always gets into a multi-level marketing deal. You know what I mean? He shows up at Thanksgiving, and he's
selling Herbalife.
It's like, guys, what if I told you could buy all your long distance for a year in January, and if the price goes up, your costs don't? They're like, what? Pass the potatoes, Uncle Lando. Oh, man. Don't you remember my maneuver at the Battle of Tanab? It's like, oh, jeez. And that's like, he's always scheming. He's always, even in like, when they go to that, in the Heir to the Empire, when he finds the, when they go to him to talk about, I forget, they need a hacker to figure out, or a slicer, as they called it in parlance of the EU, that they go to Lando's mining operation. And like, without even a beat, it's like, they're talking about it, and like, Han's just like, well, whoever Lando swindled out of this. And it's just like, oh, great. So he's he's always portrayed as the swindler. And it's like, if anything, he has he's the most altruistic of all of them. Because they literally show up on his doorstep, and Vader shows up on his doorstep, says, I'm going to hide some troops here. If you say anything, I'll kill everybody. Which this is my assumption. And then because Lando had a pretty good gig going. He was an administrator. He's like figured out this stuff, and he realized like who Solo? Oh, the guy that took my ship. In a card game and left me without a ship on some planet probably, or dropped me off. Right. And it's like, and then he shows up on my doorstep with fugitives, Yeah. And the idea that like he had to give all this up and then join a rebellion when he had just figured out how to make his way in the world. Like, I got this business, I got labor problems, but I made a deal. Maybe not the best deal. We're a small operation, blah, blah, blah. And then, he has to join this rebellion. Why? Because he, betrayed his, quote, friend? It was and he did. He did the right thing. I mean, I think,
Yeah, he made amends pretty quickly.
I don't know. I mean, they didn't hearken too much. They didn't really, Then he gets involved in the rescue. And it's like... Right. He's all in faster than even Han. He didn't take off and come back and go, I thought about it, I'm going to stay. He didn't go, okay, my work's here done, I got to leave. No, he stayed till the end. But he still gets kind of treated.
He went from outsider to immediately being a general.
Yeah, he's like the literary equivalent of some business that thinks that their prize employee is going to quit. So they hire and train somebody. Then the prize employee decides to stay around, and they just don't have the guts to kind of fire the guy they just trained. Because he was like the backup for, we're going to need some handsome and dashing young guy to take over the Han Solo part, which I think that's what they were even Billy D in interviews, he's said something like they need Han Solo had kind of gone respectable.
Right, it was insurance.
They needed he had gone respectable. They didn't know if he was going to make it to the end of the movie, and then they needed someone who was had a little bit of rough edges around him, and then Billy D said something and they needed somebody cute. And I was pretty cute. And I was pretty cute back then. And it's he's not lying. Yeah. I mean, it's they needed somebody with a little danger to him, but then they never figured out what to do with him. But that's why.
And they certainly never figured out what to do with him after the movies ended, and they were
I'm bummed. I'm bummed he's not in The Force Awakens, and I'm bummed that he's not so cute anymore. So it's not like he's going to be running. It's not like he's going to be hitting body by Jake and getting down to 175, and I mean, he's in his...
Billy D probably would be still using body by Jake, wouldn't he?
Yeah. Well, that's Jake Steinfeld is Harrison Ford's personal trainer.
Oh, is he?
He is. I know. I had to look it up. He's this the guy at CNN at 5 a.m. with the weird little chipmunk ears. He's yeah. If you look at the credits on Crystal Skull, he's credited, and he's also the guy that got him back into shape for this movie after his injury or whatever. But
can't argue with results. I guess.
I think it was actually. I think he's been his trainer for 30 years. I think he was his template.
I would imagine so. I don't think you just suddenly in 2005 or whatever call up that guy and be like, "Oh, hey, I'm doing this movie. I want to hire you."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
So that's probably a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
For this week, I think we've been going for a while.
I mean, we covered a lot of ground when I thought it was going to be a light,
really stretching it out,
a light week. But if you still want to engage with us
after all this,
if you think there's anything that we didn't talk, or somebody thinks that I didn't explain myself well enough, and you just want to yell at me, you can get we're at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. We're at talkingbirdcast on Twitter. We are on Tumblr with show notes, little things, pictures, remembrances.
Yeah, I need to put some up again.
We're a little lean this week, but hey, it's summertime. This winter, It's going to be crazy. That'd be talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com. For Talking I have been Robert Zachary.
I'm still John Llewellyn.
thank you, and may the Force be with you.